Course 103, Rural Society and Polity in India. Unit 5, Rural Social Transformation in Contemporary Times. Lesson 3, Water, Sanitation, Hygiene, that is WASH. The objectives of the lesson are to understand initiatives and challenges related to safe drinking water in rural India and to understand initiatives and challenges related to sanitation in rural India. The structure of the lesson will be as follows. After a brief introduction, we will look at what are the challenges pertaining to safe drinking water, what are the different government initiatives that have been undertaken, and then we will move on to sanitation, understand the importance of sanitation, the government initiatives. We will also have a look at some of the data pertaining to sanitation, and then we will move on to briefly look at the Sustainable Development Goal 6 and also talk about WASH and gender. The issues of health and well-being are very closely related to having an adequate water supply and having functional sanitation systems. India has been focused on ensuring access to water and sanitation services to all in its rural and also urban areas. An all-encompassing meaning of sanitation will include safe drinking water, management of fluid and solid waste, natural cleanliness, that is keeping the environment around clean, and individual cleanliness, that is individual hygiene. Neglecting any of these can have an impact on individual, family or group's well-being. Sanitation is like a lifestyle which is important for human well-being. Cleanliness and sanitation were also subjects that were emphasized by Mahatma Gandhi, who said that sanitation is more important than independence. He made cleanliness and sanitation a core part of the Gandhian way of living and wished for total sanitation for all. Let us first look at aspects of provision and challenges in access to water in rural areas, and then we will move on to sanitation and hygiene. Water. Of the various uses of water, a very important one is the availability of safe drinking water. The traditional sources of water in rural areas have been ponds, rivers, wells, tube wells or bore wells where underground water is easily available. All these sources, however, do not provide safe drinking water. Water from the river or the pond or even the wells needs to be boiled to be consumed. Groundwater that is drawn from tube wells or bore wells, if it is contaminated, becomes unsafe for drinking. Apart from drinking, water is also crucial for other household consumption like cooking, for bathing, for cleaning utensils, for washing clothes, etc. The needs of cattle are also to be taken into account when we are talking about rural households. So, the provision and availability of safe drinking water is important for rural population. Water quality is an area of great concern here, because rural areas suffer from water contamination which varies from fluoride, arsenic, iron, salinity, heavy metals, etc. contaminating water. Largely the factors that affect water quality in rural areas are over extraction by agriculture and industry, uncontrolled construction activities, siltation of the water bodies, erratic rainfall or droughts, increased use of pesticides, fertilizers, and also discharge of industrial effluents. Access to water itself is also an issue. There are many water scarce areas in India, more so in rural India. People struggle to collect water and maintain their own lives as well as that of their livestock. They have to travel from a few hundred meters to a few kilometers to collect drinking water. In some areas, due to the lack of availability of water through a water source, drinking water is provided through tankers which may not be available daily, perhaps once or twice a week. Using toilets is also linked to water availability, else open defecation becomes the norm. Prolonged drought leads to loss of economic activity, loss of livestock, and also to rural outward or distressed migration. Therefore, access to clean water close to home is very important. In 1950, India had between 3,000 to 4,000 cubic meters of water per person. Today, this has fallen to around 1,000 cubic meters which is largely due to the population growth. But according to statistics for 2011-12, about 88.5% households in rural India had improved source of drinking water, and among these 85.8% had sufficient drinking water. There are other challenges with regard to provision of safe drinking water. Disparities like socio-cultural, economic inequalities persist not only between rural and urban but also within rural areas. There is unequal spatial distribution. There is also the challenge of climate change. For example, extreme rainfall will intensify floods, and with the increase in average global temperature, scarcity of water in existing sources leading to droughts. Overexploitation of groundwater. India is the world's biggest consumer of groundwater, ahead of China and United States. The supply of drinking water has been a top priority of central and state governments in India. Rural water supply is a state subject in India. So what have been or what are the government initiatives to provide drinking water in rural India? The first formal intervention was the Accelerated Rural Water Supply Program. This was during the early 1970s, which essentially aimed to speed up coverage of drinking water supply. This got modified with the introduction of the National Drinking Water Mission in the 1980s, 1986. And in 1987, the first ever national water policy was drafted, which gave concrete direction to create sustainable water infrastructure. In 91, the Rajiv Gandhi National Drinking Water Mission replaced the National Drinking Water Mission, and then the Swachh scheme was implemented, which aimed to provide sustainable access to safe drinking water, and here priority was given to villages which did not have an adequate source of water. In 94, with the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, specific provisions were incorporated to the panchayats to take responsibility for drinking water supply. The Bharat Nirman program was a flagship program of the central government, which aimed to create required infrastructure of a good quality of life to rural households, and among various provisions, supply of drinking water was one component. The National Rural Drinking Water Program was launched thereby, which aimed to cover all rural habitations with safe drinking water, and this centrally sponsored scheme provides financial and technical assistance to the state governments, and it aimed to extend the piped water supply to more households than the ones existing in rural areas. And it also wanted to ensure adequate potable water availability in terms of convenience, in terms of affordability and equity in distributing the drinking water. With the program, the government also aimed to cover 90% of rural households with piped water supply and 80% rural households with tap connections by 2022. So the broad aim was to provide every person in rural India with adequate safe water for drinking, for cooking, for other domestic needs on a sustainable basis. In 2017, a new sub-program of the National Rural Drinking Water Program was launched. This was the National Water Quality Submission, and the aim was to address the need for clean drinking water in habitations that are affected with arsenic and fluoride. So the identified habitations affected with contaminated water. In 2018, a pilot project in the name of Swachh was launched. This was a demand-driven and community-centered program to provide sustainable access to drinking water in rural areas. It was originally launched in 6 states: Bihar, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand and Rajasthan, and later it was extended to all 112 aspirational districts that had been identified by Niti Aayog. The Atal Bhujal Yojana was introduced in areas where there was over-exploitation of groundwater. There were 7 states that had been identified for groundwater stressed areas. The idea was also to ensure sustained groundwater management with community participation. Sanitation is broadly defined to include management of human excreta, solid waste and drainage. Improved sanitation is defined as the means that hygienically separate human excreta from human contact and hence reduce health risks. According to World Bank data, feces carry more than 1 crore viruses, more than 1 crore bacteria and 1000 parasite cysts and also about 100 parasite eggs. So a poor sanitation system or poor sanitation facility has an impact at the community level as also at the individual level. If we look at the community or group level, it leads to an impact on everyone's health. It also leads to an unpleasant surrounding with the smell, with the sight. It particularly has an impact on women's health and also on women's mobility. There is also inconvenience that is caused to the group or the community. At the individual level, due to poor hygienic behavior, there is naturally an impact on personal health as you are exposed to the risk of infection, and also you tend to become a potential agent for spreading disease and infection to others. Clearly, sanitation is vital for health. It also leads to social development, helps the environment, and for all the above reasons, sanitation therefore becomes a good economic investment. India's first nationwide program for rural sanitation, the Central Rural Sanitation Program, was launched in 1986. The basic objective of this program was to improve the quality of life of rural population and to provide privacy and dignity to women. It was one of India's first efforts to provide safe sanitation in rural areas, and the idea was to provide subsidies to people to construct sanitation facilities. However, in the 1990s, based on studies, it was recognized that it's more important to raise awareness about sanitation as a whole rather than just provide subsidies for construction of sanitation facilities. This understanding and recognition marked a shift in the program, and in 1999 a restructured total sanitation campaign was initiated. The objectives of this total sanitation campaign were to accelerate sanitation coverage in rural areas, to also encourage demand-led promotion, that is to generate a push from people to get facilities rather than them expecting the government to do it on its own. A focus on intensive education and awareness campaigns to ensure that people understand the need for safe sanitation. The idea was also to take the scheme beyond rural households to rural schools and nursery schools, promote good hygiene practices there, to promote cost-effective and appropriate technologies, and through all of this, overall to improve the health and quality of life in rural areas. There were further modifications, and in 2012 the Nirmal Bharat Abhiyan was launched, and its intent was to transform India to Nirmal Bharat and have a target for reaching total sanitation by 2022. The Swachh Bharat mission. On 2nd October 2014, on the occasion of Mahatma Gandhi's birthday, the Union Government of India announced the Swachh Bharat mission to achieve total sanitation for India. And as per this scheme, special emphasis was laid on the rural areas, and the Swachh Bharat Mission Grameen, or the Clean India Mission Village, was launched. Since the launch, more than 12 million toilets have been constructed in rural areas as per government data. As per data of the World Health Organization, the WHO, it is estimated that with the Swachh Bharat Mission Grameen, potentially 3 lakh deaths were averted in 2018, and nearly 200 million cases of diarrhea which occur annually were prevented, which would have occurred prior to the Swachh Bharat Mission Grameen. One of the key aims of the Swachh Bharat Mission Grameen was to bring about open defecation free villages, that is a total coverage of open defecation free or ODF villages. A non-ODF village is more likely to face food, groundwater, soil and drinking water contamination when compared with an ODF or an open defecation free village. In a study that was done by UNICEF for the year 2019, it was reported that non-ODF villages are 11.25 times more likely to face groundwater contamination, 2.16 times more likely to face food contamination, and 2.48 times more likely to face drinking water contamination. In a study conducted by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it was reported that both children and mothers residing in ODF areas were likely to be healthier, with a 15% decrease in stunted growth rate and a 32% reduction in the number of mothers with low BMI. So the trajectory of progress achieved under the Swachh Baharat mission shows that from the time it was launched, there has been a rapid progress towards the set target. And if we look further from 2014 onwards across the different years, we see a consistent and forward growth towards achieving a complete sanitation target. The Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation publishes data related to rural sanitation scheme on its website. The State of Sanitation project is an effort which creates simple tools to simplify large data sets and compare it to other relevant data sets. The idea is to understand the success of government's rural sanitation scheme from the point of coverage, equity, accountability, efficiency and health. Let us look at the status of the rural sanitation data. Now, the census of 2011 and the data given there on rural sanitation coverage serves as a reality check to the given understanding about the government's efforts at rural sanitation, as we saw, which are moving very rapidly towards achieving complete or universal coverage. Some key statistics have emerged when we compare census 2011 data on rural sanitation and government's rural sanitation data. Difference in the total number of rural households as a first. Then there is a huge difference in the number of rural households with toilets. According to census 2011, only 30.7% of rural households had access to toilets in 2011. According to rural sanitation scheme data, the number was considerably larger at 79.9%. Some of the differences can be attributed to the fact that the number of households in the sanitation scheme data was much lesser than the household numbers in the 2011 census. But even when corrected for this, the total achievement fell to 65.7%, which is still significantly higher than the number reported by the census 2011, where it is only 30.7%. Open defecation in rural India remains a problem. India has the largest number of people who practice open defecation, about 626 million. India also has the most number of child deaths due to poor water, sanitation and hygiene conditions when compared with the rest of the world. While access to toilets by itself is an important aspect that needs to be understood, it is not enough to reach the goal of total sanitation. India's rural sanitation scheme, which was devised in 1986 and restructured in 2012 as the Nirmal Bharat Abhiyan, actually acknowledges this. And its goal is not only universal toilet coverage, but also improving health and providing privacy and dignity to women, with the overall goal of improving the quality of life of people living in rural areas. There is still a need to sustain the gains that have been made in the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin in terms of coverage, in terms of usage of toilets, in terms of the visible cleanliness and behavioral change towards sanitation. The Sustainable Development Goals, a set of 17 goals provided by the United Nations, a direction for the world to move towards 2030. In this, the Sustainable Development Goal 6 provides an overall framework to India's rural sanitation strategy. The Sustainable Development Goal 6 commits nations to achieve universal access to safe and adequate sanitation to all by 2030. So the aim is to provide access to safe and affordable drinking water, to provide access to sanitation and hygiene and end open defecation, to improve water quality, wastewater treatment and safe reuse, to increase water use efficiency, to look at integrated water resource management, and also to protect and restore water ecosystems. It's also important to understand the gender dimensions of WASH. The United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development has aptly said that water has a woman's face. It is through women's hands that households, communities and entire health and economies are sustained. However, this heavy burden often impedes women's education, income earning opportunities and social, cultural and political involvement. How? So for instance, in India, water scarcity has forced girls in rural areas to quit school as they are compelled to travel miles daily to collect drinking water for the household needs and also for the household cattle. Fetching water may require multiple trips to the water bodies, and girls as well as women could spend up to 10 hours daily for this. Traditionally in India, fetching water for household needs is seen as a woman's responsibility across ages, particularly in rural areas. Women in many parts walk for hours to collect drinking water. Women and girls therefore spend much more time on this activity than on opportunities like pursuing education or income generating activities. According to a report of the National Commission for Women, in rural Rajasthan, a woman walks over 2.5 kilometers daily to have access to the nearest natural source of water. The water crisis therefore has a significant bearing on women and girls. The disproportionate burden on women associated with fetching water, it worsens their situation as they lose out on livelihood, economic and educational opportunities. With regard to sanitation, improving girls' access to menstrual hygiene management is important. For example, including well-equipped separate toilets in schools, as that is linked to a dropout rate. I conclude the lesson with an activity for you to do. Design a complete WASH plan for a village. Highlight the key interventions, tasks or activities that need to be done both at individual and community levels. The interventions or activities that you design should cover the following: safe drinking water, access to toilets, open defecation free, behavioral practices, and also address the gender dimensions. In addition, if there are any other aspects that you feel that are important, cover that as well. Thank you.